Concept and belief of ghosts has been around for a very long time, and even with an increase of technology proving their existence more and more unlikely, I firmly believe this topic will last long after our lifetimes. Whether you firmly believe they exist, just enjoy their concept, or are trying to prove that they can't be, the theory of ghosts and paranormal behavior has a place in everyone's hearts. After all, that's why I chose this topic in the first place, as this project has given me an excuse to dive into the science behind ghosts, from real-life sightings to the games and movies. So let's not waste any more time and figure out what's really happening. So let's start with one of the biggest theories out there, that ghosts are the souls of people who have passed away and haven't quite made it to the afterlife. A scientist named Duncan McDougall tried to prove this by recording the weight of people and dogs right after they died. He noticed that the dog's weight did not change right after dying, however humans lost around 21 grams very quickly right after passing. He came to the conclusion that this was the human soul leaving the body, slightly decreasing the weight. Even, however, if you don't consider the less than controlled conditions that this study took place in, there are many theories that prove this wrong. The most popular of which is due to the effects that temperature has on the human body. When a human passes away, their metabolism keeps going for a little bit, which can create a small increase in temperature, around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. In order to calculate the amount of energy required to dissolve or evaporate 21 grams of water, we can use an equation we learned in our energy unit. Throughout this unit, we learned about heat transfer and how to calculate it in the form of the equation Q equals mCt, where Q is the amount of energy in joules, M is the mass, C is the specific heat capacity, which in this case would be water, as that's the majority of what makes up a human body, and T is the change in temperature. However, we come to a bit of a problem when trying to run these calculations. In order to heat 21 grams from the average body temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius to when it evaporate at around 100 degrees Celsius, it only requires 5,500 joules of energy. Where, instead, what about heating up the human body to only 2 degrees, which requires 1.6 million joules of energy? So clearly there is something wrong with our equations. This comes quite simply to the fact that the energy is being distributed equally throughout the body. While there are potentially millions of joules of energy being released after your death, they're being released everywhere throughout the body, and most of the water in the body is only going to be raised by a few degrees, not letting it evaporate. We can once again use our heat transfer equation to prove this theory. The average human body has around 60 kilos of water, and when you increase that by 2 degrees, you need around 16 million joules for it all to evaporate, showing why only a small percentage of water is being evaporated. Using these results, we can come to the conclusion that it is most likely not the soul leaving the body. Another popular theory is that certain ghosts, in this case these ghosts would be called poltergeists, interact with and move objects. To first understand how a ghost could theoretically move an object, we need to understand how an object can move. We can start with our kinematics unit, in which we learn that in order for an object to be moved, it needs to have an acceleration. More importantly, however, we learn that acceleration and speed do not need to match up in the sense where an object's acceleration could be negative, but the object could still be moving in the direction of the initial positive acceleration due to its velocity. We can use this knowledge to understand a possible theory within ghost moving objects. This theory states that the poltergeist can condense a large enough amount of energy to create a quick acceleration, and due to the nature of acceleration and velocity, the object will still be moving even after a brief moment of acceleration. This effect can usually be amplified with gravity. As we understand in our energy unit, where if the object is on a table or shelf, it can be pushed off, and using gravity can create an acceleration downwards, amplifying its total velocity and creating a larger noise in order to frighten its victim. However, in terms of actually moving it, we come to an issue. In our forces unit, we learn that Newton's second law states that an object stays at rest until an unbalanced force acts upon it. We also learned that in order to move an object, we need to overcome its static friction because it is stationary. To overcome this friction, the ghost would need to apply a strong enough force to overcome it, and yet ghosts are considered to be ethereal. If ghosts don't have a mass, or any real physical properties capable of applying a meaningful force, then the ghost won't be able to move the object. To prove this, we know that ghosts both float and can move through walls. Humans cannot walk through walls, and they walk on the ground because we have a mass. The mass can emit a force onto the floors or walls, which emit a normal force back. However, with ghosts, if they are not floating on the ground and they walk through walls, they don't have a mass to emit onto a mass which can emit a force onto these, and as such don't have the ability to physically move an object. That's why the main theory for how ghosts can move objects is using electromagnetic fields. As we learned in class, we can use the motor principle, or the Lorentz force, to create a force on an object. We did this using right-hand rule number 3, in which we used parts of our hand to represent what was happening within the motor principle. The direction of the conventional current with our thumb, the poles of the magnetic field with our rest of our fingers, and the direction of the Lorentz force with our palm. Many people believe that ghosts are found in areas with high levels of magnetic fields because they can manipulate them to make forces. However, without any technology to manipulate the magnetic fields, the ghost would require telekinesis, adding on to the list of ands and buts in order for ghosts to truly exist. While the two topics I mentioned above are fairly popular theories, the most common comes from people feeling another presence nearby. As I established earlier, ghosts are heavily rumored to exist within areas of strong electromagnetic fields, and as we established in class, the Earth's core creates an electromagnetic field which is used to protect us from radiation by stripping electrons from alpha particles. This, however, can be amplified in certain areas due to other circumstances, such as power lines, due to their current constantly flowing. Because our brain uses electronic signals to communicate with itself, a strong enough electromagnetic field could create some electric signals within the brain, which could potentially create confusion within it, causing it to believe certain things that don't actually exist. And yes, while this is a trick that may be able to trick certain people into believing the existence of ghosts, the easiest way to make someone believe ghosts is if a scientist themselves told them they exist. That's what happened to a university in the 1990s. People experimenting in this university would always feel like someone was in the room with them, even though there wasn't anyone there. These rumors, strangely enough, were also found in big industrial buildings, where the workers would feel the same thing, leaving people to believe that these places were haunted. The real reason people are feeling this, we learn in our sound unit. As we know, humans perceive sound through certain pressure waves, in which the pressure waves move our eardrum. The human ear, however, can only perceive certain frequencies of sound, which we can represent the frequency as we learned with hertz, or cycles of pressure per second. Lastly, we know that the human ear is not able to hear below a frequency of 20 hertz. However, other body parts can detect these waves, such as our bones, and send signals to the brain as well. And in this certain case, there were big industrial fans blowing to the room. The fans were producing a frequency of 18 hertz, which parts of our body, such as our bones, were picking up and sending signals to alert the brain. The issue with this, however, was humans can't hear this because this is below the frequency of which humans can hear. And so they were getting these signals that something was happening, but they couldn't use any of their senses to determine what it was, making it feel like a ghostly presence was in the room. This was proved when these reports stopped happening when the fans were turned off. So everything I've said has made it seem like ghosts are nothing more than rumors. But what happens if somehow they do exist and start haunting people? If you find something strange is happening in your neighborhood, who are you going to call? The answer might very well be Ernest Lawrence. If we look to the world of science fiction, we can look at all the science in movies such as Ghostbusters, and the way they catch ghosts is based on a real technology. As we learn in our nuclear energy unit, atoms can be broken down into even smaller parts, called quarks. The process of them doing this is by smashing particles into one another. But to do that, you need to move the particles very fast, to the point where they're approaching the speed of light. And once again we learned, once they do approach the speed of light, because they can't go faster or at the speed of light because they have a mass, they'll get heavier instead of faster. By smashing these together, scientists have determined that quarks exist. This application is now used in Ghostbusters by accelerating positively charged protons out of a cyclotron in their backpack to fire at the ghost, the science behind it being that the positively charged protons would have effect on the negatively charged ghosts. The coolest part of this is because of the way cyclotrons were made, how they made it in a circle using an electromagnet, this is actually a feasible technology. In conclusion, while the science discussed in this video makes it a bit hard to believe that ghosts do exist, it is always fun to understand the cool science that surrounds their mystery, and even if people don't believe that they're real, everyone has heard of a ghost before, and everyone will probably keep hearing about them for a long time to come. Thank you for listening.